This stuff is called Ascophyllum nodosum, and according to the interwebs, it's got about almost a milligram of iodine in each gram of seaweed. So we're going to load this back up and we're going to try to extract it and see what happens. So that right there is 745 grams of seaweed ash. And if we assume, and I'm just going to guess, that we took away 2/3 of the weight when we cooked it, so that's 745 times 3, that's 2 kilograms worth of seaweed times, we'll just call it 1 milligram. Well, that's about 2 grams of iodine, at least in theory. Well, we'll see what happens. My guess is I'm not pulling 2 grams of iodine out of this. Well, this attractive concoction is 1,608 grams of ash, so that's probably about 5 kilograms worth of seaweed, which again should mean close to 5 grams worth of iodine, at least in theory. Well, maybe 3.5 to 5, with 2 liters of water extracting it. So I'm going to let this soak for a while. This stuff here is sort of the original extraction. Yeah, it's incredibly salty, a little burned, and kind of an egg sort of sub-aroma. This is mostly washings out of already extracted ash. Just a real quick explanation about what I'm trying to do here. So this is some of the seaweed extract that I put on a watch glass and I just let dry. The idea is that the outer ring is going to be your least soluble salts, because the more soluble salts will stay dissolved. As the amount of water gets smaller and smaller, the salts will precipitate out in order of their solubility. So the first thing that will come out is the carbonates. The second thing that will come out is gypsum, which is calcium sulfate and magnesium sulfate. And you can actually see that this thing's got rings, right? I mean, ring, maybe even a ring there. So after the sulfates, you're going to get the monovalent chlorides, sodium and potassium chloride. Potassium first, it's slightly less soluble. Then you're going to get into magnesium and calcium chlorides, which will be toward the center. And the most soluble of all the salts that I could find are sodium and potassium iodide, so they would be concentrated in the center. So anyway, what I'm going to try to do is essentially break these rings up by evaporating the water and then stopping, and then moving it to a new container and evaporating it again, and see if I can break these fractions up and concentrate the iodides toward the end of the evaporation. Well, this is probably going to take most of a week. So after 18 hours in the fans, we've brought our 2 liters of extract down to 1 liter, and we've had some crystallization. This is probably the carbonates in the seawater. They have kind of that characteristic kind of toughness to them. They come out, but not easily. That there is probably like a calcium chloride. But either way, these are the most poorly soluble parts of the seawater. So assuming that this is a carbonates, which I'm pretty sure it is, all I have to do is drop in a little vinegar. There you go. That's a classic carbonate. So we know exactly what we had there. Let's move our way on to something different from carbonates. I'm not interested in those. So I've reduced this stuff down to 500 ml. So I've concentrated it by a factor of 4. And I got crystals. I don't know if you can see them or not. Lots of crystals. Now, this isn't sodium chloride, because sodium chloride is a square crystal. I can't come up actually with any particular salt that has these kind of irregular, mostly hexagonal, but sometimes pentagonal crystals. So I assume this is really just kind of like mixed salts. So it's time to see whether or not the seaweed has any iodine in it. This is potassium iodide. This is going to be my test control, if you will. You can buy this stuff online. People buy it so that they can take it as some medicine if there's a nuclear disaster to save their thyroids. Normally, I guess I might have gone with whack job, but it's 2020, so maybe it's a good idea to have some potassium iodide around. So all you really need to do is put in some water and let it dissolve. Iodide salts dissolve quickly and easily in water usually, so we'll just give it a minute. So once you've got your solution of potassium iodide, you add in some hydrochloric acid just to acidify the solution. That warms it up a little bit. And then you add hydrogen peroxide, and you should get kind of an immediate change here. There it is. There's your elemental iodine. And so what we'll do is we'll just let that precipitate out. Got quite warm. You can see we're starting to get elemental iodine precipitating out. So what we'll do is we'll just let that go. Now let's go and do that with our different fractions from our seaweed. Well, let's go ahead and give it a go here. This is fraction 2. This is the first one that I crystallized after the carbonates, and I'm pretty sure that this is divalent chlorides, magnesium and calcium. One of the reasons I think that is that it's wet. I can't get it to dry out or stay dried out. And as you probably know, calcium chloride is really hygroscopic. My expectation is we'll get nothing out of this because this stuff is way, way, way less soluble than iodine salts. So I wouldn't think there'd be any iodine salts in this, and voila, no iodine. Okay, this is fraction 3. This stuff tastes extremely salty, and I'm pretty sure that that's what it is. I'm pretty sure that it is sodium chloride. You know, honestly though, I can't really get it to completely dissolve, but if there's any iodine salts in here, they've dissolved. So go ahead and give it a little acid. And then we'll pour in some peroxide. I'm going to guess we're not going to get a color change. Okay, once again, no iodine. I do have to admit, I'd like to start seeing like a trace of iodine. I don't know, the color might have changed a tiny little bit. I think it did. Let's watch it for a minute. I think there might be a slight color change there. What do you think? Is there a color change? There sure is. So there might be a little iodine in there. Just took a little while to come around. Let's move on to fraction 4. Fraction 4 is the stuff that was sort of the random in the middle of what I think is my sodium chloride and the last stuff that I got, which I'm really hoping is my iodide. I don't know, we'll see. Let's throw in some peroxide. I am not seeing much. We'll give it a minute and see. I'd really like to have seen some iodine out of fraction 4 because that doesn't bode well for fraction 5. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you wait a minute, you start to get a color change. That's interesting. I guess there's just not a lot of iodine in it, but there's some. Well, here we go. This is fraction 5. This is the stuff that I hope is my iodide because it's the stuff that didn't precipitate out until I dried out the last 150 mLs of my 2-liter extraction, and there's 83 grams in here. So it was pretty soluble in water. That's like 60 grams per ml, or 60 grams per 100 ml, which is more soluble than sodium chloride by a good bit. It's also got the piss color because it took all the leftover coloration that I didn't remove in earlier steps. So we'll go ahead and give it a little acid here. Okay, here we go, live on TV. Well, no money shot. Well, I mean, that's clearly an iodine reaction. There's just not very much of it. So I am going to see iodine, but I'm not going to get enough to recover. Here's the potassium iodide. And they're clearly very different, but that is clearly iodine in the seaweed. Anticlimactic, but it did produce iodine. I guess I should stop complaining. Well, there you go, guys. Iodine from seaweed. I guess I'm not going to get enough iodine for what I need out of that seaweed, my guess is, but at least I know that it's there. Anyway, I guess I'll call that one an episode. Thanks, guys, for watching. I appreciate it. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you want. Obviously, you don't have to if you don't want to. I'd appreciate it if you'd tell your friends. Again, not necessary. They don't have to watch, but if they want to watch, I'll be here doing my thing. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and have a great day. I didn't manage to actually isolate any usable iodine from the seaweed, but I used 8 grams of this potassium iodide, and I wound up with 3.5 slightly moist grams of iodine from that potassium iodide. I have a need for iodine. So I spent 20 bucks for this 30-gram bottle of iodine on eBay. So that's about, what, 67 cents a gram. I used 8 grams of this stuff. I spent 20 bucks for 100 grams of, actually I spent 16 bucks for 100 grams of potassium iodide. And if you work that out, considering that the peroxide's essentially free, it costs almost nothing, and I already had the acid, that's about 35 cents a gram here versus 65 cents a gram there. Now, I have to count the casualties. Honestly, working with halogens, they're reactive, right? So you have to expect you're going to have some issues, and then again, the thing comes down that iodine's actually not that bad, whereas, bromine, I mean, who in the world would be stupid enough to mess around with bromine?